Well, good morning, Critical Bench listeners. This is Coach Chris Wilson here on a not-so-beautiful day in Florida, but that's one of few here in the beginning of February 2014, and I am honored to have Mr. Mike Gillette, Mr. Savage Strength himself, on the line with us today, and we are going to discuss a lot of things in Mike's long history in doing feats of strength. First, I want to just mention real briefly before we start blabbing away here, is that there's an upcoming event on True TV's Guinness World Records Unleashed, February 13th, 2014, and it's going to show Mike doing one of his crazy stunts of snapping arrows at the base of his neck, as many as he can get in 60 seconds, which is pretty amazing. So, Mike, good morning to you, sir.
Hey, Chris. Good to be with you.
We have obviously had Mike interviewed in the past, and we talk about him quite a bit. We have videos of his in our database, and we just love the things that he can do. It's obviously a testament to not only the power of physical strength, but of mental strength, obviously, too. I guess maybe I'll just start with a question about that. What do you find, Mike, to be more of a challenge for you before you do any one of your feats of strength? Is it kind of getting your head in the game a little bit more than the physical preparation?
Well, it's a great question, and I think that's probably one of the questions that comes up most often for me, is
right.
How do you do what it is that you do, particularly because I'm an older guy and I'm a smaller guy relative to feats of strength. Now, a lot of what I do, this Guinness record attempt is one example, is much less to do about physical strength per se and simply what we can do with our mind. When we decide upon a particular course of action, in my case, we're talking about the arrows. A lot of people say, why would you do that? That looks scary, it's gross, it looks risky. And the answer is, I saw someone do it. I saw one of these, traveling Shaolin monk shows, and I saw that being done, and I just thought, okay, that's really interesting. And if someone else can do it, I don't necessarily see why I can't do it. I mean, if it's a situation where we're talking about, a 700-pound bench press, I can explain to you very quickly why I can't do that. But this is different. This is not dependent on a lot of those physiological things. This is much more something that is facilitated in the psychological realm, as you say. So when it comes to a lot of the braking or the impact-related stunts that I've done, that's much more of a mental thing, and it's all about getting my mind around the task at hand in the first place, and then being able to sort of replicate the necessary state I need to be in order to accomplish those types of things. Because if you watch just that video mashup that you guys put together to promote Savage Strength, there's a lot of me getting hit, jumped on, breaking things, and those things generate, when you hear people talk about physics, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. There's a Bruce Lee movie where he famously admonishes a martial arts student, said, boards don't hit back. This is right up for somebody to hit a board. Well, it sounds great in a soundbite, but it's not actually true. If I hand you, Chris, a Louisville Slugger and have you stand in front of a tree and swing as hard as you can, what do you think you will experience? You will hit the tree, but then the tree will hit you back.
Absolutely.
You will feel all of that impact radiated back into your body, and all of that energy has to go somewhere. So that's kind of the way that I explain a lot of what it is that I do. Even when something breaks successfully, you still experience that energy being transferred back into you. And if something doesn't break successfully, you experience it at an even more meaningful level. So when it comes to, impact force or blunt force trauma or things that could potentially penetrate parts of the body, if I'm bending rebar with my throat, breaking arrows with my throat, those are things that are really about overcoming what obviously there is. There's discomfort or pain or however you choose to describe it.
Right.
But talk to a triathlete. Talk to somebody who's world class. And despite that they're gifted and they're well trained, the only way that they get to be world class is by crossing through certain psychological thresholds of discomfort. When the body wants you to stop, what is it that makes you keep going? Well, it's a goal that's meaningful enough to you that you keep going. Talk to anybody who's been in the military that's had to get through experience X in order to achieve status Y, and the Y for them, the word Y, W-H-Y, would be that it meant something to get through Ranger School, to become a SEAL, whatever that is.
Right.
And when people say, I could never do that, they're absolutely right. I mean, they've literally already made the decision.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. Wow.
That's kind of my overall big picture approach. I mean, there are specific things I do depending on the individual task at hand, but it's all about getting my mind right. I had, in many of the things that I do now, at one time I thought were impossible. I had to see somebody do it, or sometimes see somebody do it a couple of times to make sure that I wasn't hallucinating the first time I saw it. And then once I was convinced of its real world possibility, then I had to figure out, okay, now how do I do that?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just know that it does take a certain individual. My former college roommate, obviously we're going back a long time, almost 20 years ago. He was a Marine, and he became a special force, recon, and he would often, I was curious. I grew up, I was the son of a Marine, and one of my uncles was a Marine, and then when I knew what that my roommate at the time had kind of gotten to that next level, and I'm like, what drove you? He would tell me some of the physical things that they had to do, pushing a Jeep through terrain in Okinawa for hours, and all these just crazy things in the indoctrination, and it's just this. Some people have this internal will to not fail. They don't have quit in them, or if they do, it's the spectrum that they have is so much more vast than a normal or average person's. It's going to take a lot more to break that person than it is someone else, and obviously you would fall into that where you're kind of off the charts in terms of what you're willing to put yourself through physically and mentally. So that's I really appreciate how eloquently you kind of, went through that for the audience, because that helps us get into your mind a little bit more, That being said,
it's a scary place for a lot of people to be.
It's a scary. We don't want to hang around in your mind too long. We might be a little bit too scared.
Just keep moving.
And speaking about what you're willing to put yourself through physically, what's the most significant injury maybe or that you endured or sustained in either training or performing?
I don't have any real specific feats of strength related injuries. I have a lot of chronic ones, which are simply the result of what if you decide that you're going to operate on the raggedy fringes of what your body is capable of doing, there is a cost to be paid. And, at this point in time, I'm 51, almost 52, and not physically gifted. I don't have the robust structure of a lot of people who might naturally gravitate towards these types of activities. So, narrow shoulders, narrow wrists, small hands, some short muscle attachment on the arms. I don't have favorable leverage anywhere. So everything that I do is, basically built around where I'm trying to go with it and what I think I can get away with. I had a recent, a couple of years ago, training injury where I ripped my bicep off my bone, but that was actually teaching some defensive tactics stuff to some government personnel, but there was sort of a connection there, so I'll kind of go off on that.
Yeah.
This is June of 2011, and in Vegas, where I do a lot of instructional work and consulting work for a company out there, and was training some personnel, doing just some real basic sort of moving one person from point A to point B, some techniques for that. So they were very almost law enforcement looking subject movement or subject escort techniques. And there was one gentleman who was having a little difficulty getting the technique with his partner, so I jumped in and became his partner, said, I will talk you through it, and then go ahead and we'll get this figured out. So he puts me in a position which in essence was sort of a standing arm bar. Okay, so my right arm was completely hyperextended, my one arm to his two arms. Now, I will typically tell someone, okay, put a little pressure on that. I want you to feel where the arm can go. And I said, I'll resist and I'll be fine. So he starts pushing, and mathematically, I really didn't have an appreciation for the situation because he's a much bigger guy than I am.
Yeah.
And he had two arms on my one arm. And what really hadn't kind of entered into my mind is that over time, my pain threshold is not what it was a long time ago, where if you put me into a particular technique, I get to a point, I tap because, wow, this is really uncomfortable. I'm all messed up now in terms of if something hurts me, it's probably already past the point of potential injury. Just because
I'm already getting queasy just thinking about the situation right now.
Right.
You're describing.
I'm operating in kind of an altered universe in terms of what my normal senses are telling me is going on. So he's pushing, and I'm thinking this doesn't feel like much. So I'm just I'm giving him some resistance, and I didn't realize how far I was, and all of a sudden there were two audible pops, and the arm kind of wobbled laterally, and he immediately knew something was wrong, and let go of my arm, and I looked down, and the bicep was already curling up towards the shoulder. So, in a couple of minutes, it was getting black, purple, and it was. I hadn't gotten to the ER yet, but it was obvious that what happened. So that was an example of when you train on the raggedy edge, you're actually kind of modifying, to some extent, the normal communication system that your body has with itself.
Right.
And I think this is why some of your really strong powerlifters, when they tear a pec or something like that, they subject their bodies to a lot of stress, and what feels normal to them based on their present level of significant strength is far different than where they were operating when they began. And that's just kind of something that goes hand in hand with taking yourself as far as you can, whether it's doing what I do, or you're a power lifter, or look at all the injuries that are possible in competitive arm wrestling. These are people who are subjecting subjecting their bodies to maximum levels of strength and tension, and there's a potential price to be paid for that. Not everybody gets hurt, thank goodness, but you have to be willing to embrace that as a possibility if you're going as far as you possibly can go.
Wow, that is something else. So you're right. You just completely shift your senses to kind of take. It's all that you just kind of, what hurt when you were 10 or 12. You stopped right away, and you just built. It's like almost you become numb to those sensations, and over time they just become the norm. And yeah, it's wow, that's really interesting. I've never really thought about it like that, but it makes perfect sense after you kind of explain it and go through it like that. The fact that you have you have an extensive history. I won't even get into it in obviously in military and law enforcement. It's years and years and years and years, and it's just crazy. Is there one particular was there one particular point in your life, and maybe it's even currently, where you just really enjoyed what you were doing in terms of like whether it was law enforcement or military? There was just something about, just to let the audience know a little bit more about, your professional career, what you found to be maybe the most enjoyable or the most fulfilling.
Interesting question. I think that for me, there's always been kind of a duality. I had a very troubled upbringing as a child. There was a lot of transient, a lot of moving. There was a lot of substance abuse. There was a lot of violence in the home. We were lived poor, and that eventually, sort of the accumulation of a lot of those experiences by the time I was an adolescent had led to a lot of very negative choices on my part. And that sort of lasted up through, 18 into my 19th year on this planet. And it was in my 19th year that things suddenly turned around for me. And that was simply because I began dating a girl who I would do things to try to impress, like a lot of guys, or just demonstrate that, hey, we've got similar interests. One thing that she did that I was completely ignorant of, had not really been exposed to, is that she attended church. So I started attending church with her, and in a very short period of time, the positivity of that experience and everything, that's about, as I started reading that book that they all had in the bench in front of me, all of that resonated in a very significant way. And although I was still very young, I had the presence of mind to think that, okay, if I've lived my life one particular way and the results of that were extremely negative, then if I just do the opposite, it's like that Seinfeld episode where George Costanza decides to do the opposite of what he would normally do and everything goes really well. It was that. It was, me basically looking to go in the opposite direction that I had been. And in very short order, I found myself, in the military, as a young Christian, and being surrounded with other examples of, strong, positive-minded men whom I really wanted to emulate. So when I was in that environment, I absolutely loved it. It was a very meaningful place to me. The idea of trying to serve a cause or a role that's larger than oneself, that was very evident to me in my young perspective, and the perpetual challenge nature of that environment. In the Army, if you are happy where you're at, that's great. If you feel you need a little bit more of a challenge, there's a place for you. If you need a lot more challenge, there's still a place for you. And you literally can go as hard and as deep and as sort of beyond yourself as you can imagine. And, I was in the 82nd Airborne, so I'm at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And as much as I thought I was just super cool being a paratrooper in the 82nd, just down the street was Special Forces, and I had a real longing for that. When it came time to re-enlist, I actually didn't do that because I had been afforded an opportunity to pursue becoming an officer. I had supervisors that wanted me to take college courses while I was still on active duty as an infantryman, which was unheard of. And so I transitioned out and pursued that aggressively for 6 months until I was completely torn up in a climbing accident, which started, a very challenging 4 years trying to overcome a broken back and, screws holding my ankles together and people saying I would never again and so on. But fast forward to 1989, and I was able to kind of rehab myself to a point where I could consider entering the field of law enforcement, which I did. And that was another period of my life where I was extremely happy where I was extremely happy doing what I was doing, but there was an aspect of me that was very restless. And I got introduced to being a trainer very early on. I was sent to a law enforcement fitness trainer school, the outcome of which was, you go back to your agency and you serve as a resource for personnel who may have weight issues or limited mobility because they've been around a long time, or they're coming off of an injury because there's a lot of injuries in law enforcement. So you would become that guy. And I found that because I'd always been an ardent student of physical culture, particularly when I was injured. I had like 4 years. I was trying to, sort of educate myself back into functionality. And I had developed a real passion for, strength training and conditioning and just everything about that. So I also found that I had an aptitude for teaching and a real interest and a passion for that. So I started developing that side of myself really hard, and I realized that, I was a cop in the middle of essentially nowhere, in the Midwest at, an agency, no place special. I mean, yes, the work is important and all of that, but there was something about me that wanted to push to another level, and I knew that I couldn't do that waiting around. I had to do something to sort of fast track that. And I had been active in martial arts, and I'd continued to train in martial arts and, seek out famous instructors across the country and go train with them. And that led to things. And I did the same thing with, police training. I was taking vacation time. I was sending myself to training sessions because I felt interested or that I just needed qualification X or Y. So over a period of time, I had basically built myself, kind of into this Frankenstein monster of training expertise. And in 2001, I left law enforcement to be involved in training full time. So while I was in law enforcement, absolutely loved it, but parts of me were very frustrated and restless. And I had that same experience in the Army. I loved it, but parts of me were constantly looking ahead down the road, sometimes not really knowing what I was looking ahead to. When I got involved in training, this was several months before 9/11. 9/11 had a huge impact, sadly, on the trajectory of my professional life. I ended up doing a lot of work for the airline industry post 9/11. I was the primary architect for a training program for the Disney Corporation. Disney was one of the originally considered 9/11 targets. That wasn't known until after the 9/11 Commission report came out. And Disney needed to solve that problem. I was the person that came in to try to solve that problem for them. I wrote training curriculum for DHS. I did a lot of things that were very 9/11 related through about 2006. 2006 to 2012, primarily involved in executive protection work. And it was while I was involved in executive protection work that I became exposed to feats of strength. And that is sort of where I found myself at a crossroads. On the one hand, I had hit the top of my relative industry. You know, the people who work full-time in protection tend to come from military special operations units, so forth. They tend to be the smoothest, the fastest, the quickest on their feet, you know, the baddest, whatever. So I was in very good company, working with brilliant guys, you know, just so talented. And that part was really interesting. I liked the guys. The work itself is not as compelling as a lot of people might think. You know, yes, it's interesting to work with, you know, Fortune 100 executives. Yes, it's interesting to work around celebrities, but it's only interesting to a point. And, you know, you're kind of solving and doing a lot of the same things over time. The quirks of your client have a lot to do with the quality of your life. You know, do they travel a lot? Do they this? Do they that? And I found myself, you know, less engaged by that over time. And that was about the time that I became interested in feats of strength, not to do them because I thought that was impossible, but because there was one guy in particular who was fairly well known for doing them. He was a little older than me. He was physically smaller than me, and yet he could do things that were, in my mind, impossible. Talking about the first guy to bend a crescent wrench in half at a body weight of about 160 pounds. How does that happen? How does his body just not snap in half? Those were the questions I had. So I contacted, because like I said, I've pursued a lot of very famous, very talented martial arts types over the years, and I kind of saw this guy as that same sort of thing. He knows something that I need to know. So, you know, we started communicating. He invited me to a training event that he was doing a little later on. This was in 2008, where he had some of his proteges from all over the country and a couple internationally travel in to train with him. And he said, hey, look, if you're interested in training, you'll get to be very close to guys who do different things. You know, you get a lot of different perspectives. I said, oh, I can't wait. So, you know, 4 days in Houston, Texas, and I'm just, you know, shoulder to shoulder with these guys who can do things that are impossible. And it's one thing to watch this stuff on YouTube. It's another thing to hear metal creak as it's bending. You know, to hear these guys, you know, breathe and strain while they're doing what they're doing. And some of these guys are my size. So at that point I realized, okay, impossible is maybe more relative than I had thought. And maybe there's a way I can, you know, incorporate some of what they're doing. Again, it still seemed very beyond my capability. But the thing that stuck with me was not actually what they were doing physically. These were guys who, you know, when I talked to them, they're using their abilities to communicate things. You know, these are guys that go into schools or churches, you know, prisons sometimes, and you can capture someone's attention when you can do things that are extreme in nature. And then once you've captured their attention, they might be a little more receptive to things you have to say. In essence, feats of strength gave these guys a platform. That was what was interesting to me. I wanted that. So I started on that path, and it took a period of time to even figure out if this was within the realm of possibility for me. And I mean, I was torn up and sore, and I realized very early on that, okay, if I want to do this, it's going to cost me something. I'm always going to be beat up, you know, or at least for a while. And I decided, okay, I can deal with that. And for me, it's never been about, hey, look at me bend this thing or break that thing for me. Because I don't care. I've done a lot of stuff for me over the years. I've built, you know, a crazy resume, and I've met amazing people. And, you know, as far as Mike Gillette's concerned, it's not about Mike Gillette anymore. It's about other people. So for reasons, you know, kind of outside my understanding, I was very successful relatively quickly at this. I would say 6 months after I started in with it, I was doing my first public performance, and it was, you know, I had to travel a good distance. It was actually in Florida, where you live. And from there, you know, the opportunities to present, you know, they just kept coming. And at this point, I've been all over the country, literally from coast to coast, doing these things, and have been, very fortunate in I have been able to share things about myself that I hope are meaningful for some people, because I was the least likely person, Chris, to have my life. If you would have seen me as a child, looking basically like that confused kid in the middle of the night on an episode of Cops, with chaos and drunkenness and the cops coming in and trying to sort that out. I was one of those kids wandering around just going, why is my life like this? So, fast forward to the point where, I'm traveling with the rich and famous, and I'm there because I'm, taking care of them. It was an absolute reversal of much of my early life. And additionally, I look at myself physically. Okay, I'm 5'9", 185. I'm actually just under the 50th percentile in terms of size. So it's not size that facilitates what I do. It's something else. And that is something that I take a great deal in satisfaction in sharing with people. So that's a really long answer to your question, but that's
that might be, yeah. I mean, that's I feel like all my other answers have been, or other questions have been answered. I think we're good. No, just kidding. Just kidding. That was fantastic. I don't know. I mean, that was like a book's worth of knowledge there. And information about you, but it's also very interesting. I know it is for me. It leads me to actually several other questions, but just very quickly, because I'm sure. I mean, this could be a quick or a long answer, I guess. But in terms of mentors, now we all, or people that we admire, or people that we look to for motivation, let's say, at a young age, in early adult life, or as mature men. Are there any people that come to mind for you that you look to or looked up to as a younger person, as a young man, and or currently, and has that have those people changed over the course of your life, or are they, or is there somebody that you've always kind of had a bit of a admiration for?
Well, certainly it's changed over time. When I started thinking in terms like that, it was when I was 19, and I started to try to conceptualize myself as someone who could be a physical person, because up to that point, I was the opposite of that, small, weak, all of that. And, so the defining sort of persona on the landscape was something that was related to martial arts, because I started in martial arts in late 81. And there was, just as there is now, there was still nothing that loomed larger than Bruce Lee. So I purchased his books, which, they're basically the same books that are still out now, but just the ones that contained his writings, and I was interested in that. And, I hadn't seen the movies because I really hadn't, I was too young. They were at the drive-in circuit, that kind of thing. But I knew of him not as a movie star, but as a martial arts, proponent. So right. As I started buying the magazines and reading how other martial artists were, sort of, impressed with, wanted to emulate, certain things about him physically, and I had a real sense of the largeness of his influence within that realm. That never really went away. So. I started martial arts from the Army. I was in the Army. Then I had that kind of, blurry 4-year period where, I wasn't sure what I was going to be able to do physically because I was just a mess. But when I was able to, kind of reconnect with the physical side of myself, martial arts immediately, became a part of that. And the Bruce Lee thing stayed with me, and I just through random chance, happened to connect with a guy who was a cop who taught martial artists, who was an instructor under one of Bruce Lee's original students. So we would periodically have that guy, his name is Larry Hartzell, he's deceased now. He would come in, once a year or so, and do an event for our group, and that led me to connect with another West Coast-based instructor in Bruce's style, and then another. So I have connected with people who were connected to Bruce, and were able to answer a lot of questions, because I think in many ways, he was a very big picture thinker. He was the first martial artist to really embrace training in a non-conventional way, non-conventional martial arts. Way back when weightlifting would make you slow and bulky, here's a guy who's 135 pounds that was, fast as lightning, and he lifted weights all the time. He was small, but he was stupid strong relative to his
size. He was just silly strong, and
and
had
that
muscles.
was not lost on me. Yeah. So there was that. I mean, early on in the early 80s, you couldn't have kept me away from a Chuck Norris movie. For example, I was just, as silly as they were and are, there was, just wait till the fight scene, and it's all going to be fine. And, Chuck never disappointed. And the thing about Chuck and Bruce that I got, that I connected with is, they're small guys.
Right. And
I was never, because I was never connected to sports as a kid, so I never had, larger than life, sort of football idols or anything like that. It just, I missed all of that. But if someone looked like they were something that I could potentially attain, or, there weren't obvious differences in us, that made me feel a lot more connected. And then, of course, when I was in the military, I was walking, shoulder to shoulder with guys who had, been in special forces in Vietnam and so forth that, were small. They came in all sizes, but they were just amazing, amazing men. And it started to dawn on me through talking with them, because, I was a pesky kid. I want, how is it that you can be you? What is the process? And I asked everybody who would give me the time of day absolutely everything. I actually took a lot from those conversations early on, and I think they sort of helped me through when I was struggling with, overcoming my broken back and that kind of thing. And over time, it became less about the Chuck Norrises and the Bruce Lees and about real people, because I've just been very fortunate to meet men that embodied certain qualities that I felt I needed a lot more of, or I just simply wanted to, have a lot more of. So there was that phase of my life when it was really about trying to emulate somebody. But as I have sort of hit the age I am now, I'm officially middle-aged, it's been more about men who I know who just either do the things that I do or understand the things I do. You mentioned the Guinness World Record thing, at the beginning of our conversation. I have met people through what I do that don't do what I do, but they do other things that are extreme. And I have found that there's kind of a mental, emotional kinship with those people. And one of my recent friends is actually a fairly young kid. He's still in his 20s, but he does extreme acrobatics. He just went to Austria and did like a series of flips off of a 120-foot crane onto a big airbag, and that's burning up YouTube. I don't do that, but I understand it. And conversely, someone like him sort of understands the things that I do. And the encouragement and sort of the note swapping that happens there, is very important. And I have some friends that are very much engaged in performing feats of strength that are extremely encouraging of what I do, which is helpful, because I do things for the most part, that are sort of outside of that realm. I'm not like a big steel bending guy. I don't do a lot of the trademark feats of strength that some people believe you need to do to be quote unquote legit, because I'm just not interested in them. I don't care about ripping things that are made out of paper, for example. No offense to all my friends who are geniuses at that, but I like to do things that are big and dangerous looking and just different looking. And because, again, it's not for me, it's for other people. So I'm always thinking about what do other people respond to. And they tend to respond to these, big, reckless, crazy things.
No, and that's what makes...
So over time, it has changed, but it's always been, and I think it is for most of us. I think that we need to be outside of ourselves. We're never going to get to where we need to be by being self-contained. I think anyone, and I mean, I've been around some of the most accomplished businessmen on the planet, and even they have people within their circle that they need to confide in, that they need to get counsel from, or just simply encouragement. Because, being a trailblazer and whatever it is that you do can sometimes be a lonely place, and a lot of people will, throw rocks at you. And every now and then you kind of need to recalibrate and figure out if what you're doing is correct. Because I think the more unique a path you try to pursue, the more resistance that the world just kind of throws out.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. There's people like conformity, or maybe it's not that they don't that they like it, that it just feels more natural, or it's easy. It's easy to conform to things. That's what makes you so interesting, though, because you are doing these different things. You're not the guy ripping the phone books. You're rolling up frying pans and snapping arrows on your neck and stuff. I mean, that's for us. I know for our audience, that's that much more interesting to us. Now, I'll just quickly ask you, in terms of this thing that you have coming up in a couple of weeks here, how do you go about training to endure a real arrow touching the base of your throat? And obviously it's not getting shot at you, it's placed there, and then there's a lot of force that happens there of you pushing your body into this arrow to the point where you're going to snap it. But what do you do specifically to train for something like that?
That is an extremely common question, and I'm afraid that my answer is never really that satisfactory to most people.
That's okay.
And it's simply because that particular feat it's not really physical in nature. It's not like I'm, over time putting secret salves on my skin and somehow, increasing the durability or, whatever.
Right.
It's a question of, I saw it done, which was important, because if I didn't perceive it as something that was within the realm of capability, I just would have abandoned it. Someone said, well, how about if you do this? And it's like, nah, that doesn't sound like that'll work. But once I saw it, it's like, okay, so then I need to see it again, and I need to see a couple of people do it and sort of figure out, okay, what's going on. And it's literally one of those things where, how do you do it? Exactly by doing what I'm doing. There are no secrets. It's just right there in the open. You simply do it. And the only secret is really about how fast and how hard I move or press. And that was trial and error. Just my testing laboratory, which is also my garage, there was a lot of, mentally thought words of frustration and pain as I sort of figured out the tempo and the pressure that was, safest and most, productive. And that's just that one task. Now, when it comes to like breaking bricks, there are things that we do. In addition to being as strong as I can possibly be and being able to hit fast, which is important. There's a durability factor that comes in, and I do a lot of the same types of progressive impact training that you would see other traditional martial artists do. The only difference is I didn't discover those exercises until after I started breaking. I learned how to break in a day. I went from having broken no bricks in my life to breaking 6 in a day. And I don't recommend it, but it was extenuating circumstances. My very first performance was a week and a half from the date that I did that, and I was so injured trying to work horseshoes and steel bars that I couldn't do what I had been planning on doing. So I knew I needed to do something, so I figured, well, maybe I can break some stuff. I found a guy who was willing to try to teach me in very short order how to break bricks. And there are 2 ways to do it. You can either, enter into the martial arts and, learn your basic body movements, and you'll break a thin board and a thicker board and then several boards, and then over time, you'll be breaking bricks. And not that it's ever super safe and super sensible, but that's the safer, more sensible route to take. Then there's the route that Mike Gillette took, which is seldom sensible or safe. And in this case, all it took for me was a willingness to hit the bricks as hard as I could, as fast as I could, and be willing to accept the result. And I've been pretty dinged up. I mean, someone who's really good and really studied at breaking would look at me and they would just freak out. They say, "Oh my gosh, you should be shattering your wrist every time you do that. You're all over the bricks. You're not." And it's all true. I'm not technically good at it because I don't have years and years of doing it. I mean, I've been doing it a couple of years now, but I'm still, I'm swinging like a caveman compared to somebody who's just got immaculate technique.
Yeah, and this coming from a guy with a pretty extensive martial arts background too. I mean, by the way, you didn't just fall off the boat, and just say, "I'm going to break a brick." You have 20, 30 years of, pretty heavy duty physical training behind you, at least.
Yeah. But that is true, but it's different because I never came from a system where we ever did anything to boards or bricks.
Right.
It was more practical in nature. Not that it's impractical. I mean, boards and bricks are cool. They're a great way to kind of test yourself, but it's different than sparring. It's different than grappling with someone.
Yeah.
And, so it was all new to me. So, I mean, yeah, I know how to generate power, but, naked flesh colliding with naked concrete is there's a certain mental switch that you have to throw or it's not going to happen, because you'll pull back at the last minute because your brain will tell you, "Hey, idiot, you're about to slam your hand into concrete." And and that's actually where injuries happen. It's you literally have to be all in order to do some of those things. And that's why I say there's progressive impact training exercises that sort of help with that. Because when people say, "I saw you do X, gosh, doesn't that hurt?" The answer is, yeah, of course it does. It's not like you can train your brain to override, the nervous system. But
right.
What you can do, what I have found that I can do, is I can do it briefly. I can do it long enough to get through the thing, the task. I can get myself mentally where I need to be to do that. But the 10 seconds is, maybe the duration. And then, okay, here it comes. I'm experiencing the sensation. But again, look at your triathletes. Look at your weekend rugby player.
Right.
Those people are getting knocked around. Pain is pain. I mean, yeah, it's relative. Maybe I'm generating more, focused amounts of it in a more focused area. But we all do things that we have decided are worth doing because we like it. There's a lot of guys who aren't in shape that still go out and play golf, and by the end of the day, it's kicking their butt. And, yeah, it would be smarter to to train themselves so they can sustain that activity longer and more productively, but they're still going out and doing it. It's a variation of what I'm doing. Something is meaningful. They do what they like. They do what has meaning, and they're willing to accept the consequences.
Now, the bowling ball, just bring up briefly, I should say, the bowling ball getting dropped several meters above you. I think it's about it's almost 3 meters, right?
Well, it's different heights. I mean, when I did the Ripley stunt, it was a particular height because we needed to hit a certain altitude to get that. I wanted 3 tons. I wanted to be able to, survive 3 tons of impact, and it was somewhere between 8 feet and 9 feet. I don't remember the exact height, but I had an engineer figure all of that out, and that was the one that I did while laying on broken glass.
Right, on the broken glass. Did you throw was the glass just like a last minute, why don't we make it a little bit more flashy?
No, that actually, I told you about that training injury I had. When I was nursing myself over the ruptured bicep tendon.
Oh, the biceps, yeah.
Train, I came up with that stunt because at that point I had no idea if I was going to be able to return to hard training, if I was ever going to bend or roll or do anything again like that. And I had an opportunity in front of a pretty big audience to do something, and I had been looking hard at Ripley's, at doing something that was worthy of Ripley's, because I had a friend who was in Ripley's. And again, it comes back to, once I know that something is possible, I mean, I was a Ripley's fan when I was a kid, read all those books in the school library when I should have been doing math. But when I actually met a guy and hung out with a guy who had been featured in Ripley's, believe it or not, I realized, okay, so people I know can do this, maybe I can do this. And I had been thinking for a long time of something that, might be appropriate to submit to Ripley's. That's where I hatched this particular idea, and I needed something that wasn't dependent on my arm. So the glass I had to factor in early on because it was at a big 4th of July event, and the community that was putting it on needed to get insurance for this particular activity.
Gotcha.
So they had to know heights, weights, glass, all of that sort of thing to get an insurance rider to make that happen, because they had to absorb some cost for this particular stunt.
Just like your abs had to absorb 6,000 pounds of force.
It is not. I mean, I've done I'd done the bowling ball before then. I've done it after. Not with that weight. That was a 16-pound ball at a particular height. I'm not looking forward to recreating that particular stunt again anytime soon. It was tough. It was tough.
I can't imagine. I mean, most of us have picked up and that's as heavy as a bowling ball gets. I'm pretty sure, 16 pounds.
As far as I know, I'm not a bowler.
Yeah, I think that's your highest rated. I don't know much about bowling, to be honest with you, but I know that that's the ball. If a guy goes to an alley, he wants the heavy one, right, so he can fling it down and knock all the pins. And I couldn't imagine someone dropping that from, several feet above me onto my stomach. It's just mind-blowing. And then, maybe the next time you do it, Mike, you should do like a bed of hot coals. You should lay on that instead of the glass.
I'll keep that in mind, Chris. Yeah, thanks for the idea.
No problem. Let's. I want to ask one more question.
Okay.
You've mentioned that you're just entered into your 50s officially. What'd you say?
I'm officially middle-aged.
Officially middle-aged. Right. Even though obviously that's to be determined, because age isn't always a good determining factor of our health. But from your 30s to your 40s to your 50s, physically, barring injuries and all that stuff, do you feel physically in a lot of ways you're just as capable now as as you were when you were 30 or 40, or what?
That's a really good question. I'm going to say both yes and no. And the no has to do with what I don't do presently. And what I don't do presently is run. I mean, I'll occasionally bust out some sprints, but I used to run all the time because, up through around 40, I was still in law enforcement, and it was just something that I saw as a necessary thing. I mean, I was still having to bust out of the car and run people down, and, I'm not going to be successful at that if I don't run. So if you were to ask me to run a couple of miles today, I would be a lot crankier about it than I would 10, 20 years ago. Would I do it? Yeah, I would do it, but I would be thinking bad words. On the strength side, and purely strength, I'm going to say that I am stronger today than I was 10 years ago, stronger than 20 years ago. However, I would qualify that. There are certain exercises I don't do now because they just got to a point where they were just tearing me up. And I was doing a lot of things, 15, 20 years ago because it's what everybody did. There were certain exercises that I just thought I had to do. And not all of them were being done in a joint-friendly way, or not all of them that I was doing I should have ever been doing. So I don't do conventional bench presses now. Now I do bench presses with a Swiss bar. Okay, so I've got the mutual parallel grip, and I'll occasionally do reverse grip bench presses because those I can still get away with. But I do a lot of ring work. I do a lot of weighted ring work, and in that sense, I'm doing some things that busting out ring dips was not something I would have done 10 years ago. Busting out ring dips with 100-plus pounds around my waist, I would have thought was impossible, at my size. So there are things that I do now in training that, because I'm used to me, I sort of take them for granted. But I'm still very strong on certain movements. These movements have become much more specialized. As I age, I have to make certain adjustments, sort of ergonomically with what I do in the gym. But I'm still pushing really, really hard. Now, I know that as, I kind of slide through my 50s, I'm going to start seeing the inevitable, dropping down in numbers. But there are a lot of ways that we can measure strength, beyond just, sheer load or sheer volume. When we start injecting the variable of time, we can look at some other ways of accumulating output and measuring that, so that the more ways that we have to kind of define strong or define progress, the better, particularly as we age, because just the typical way, numbers up, numbers down, may not work as well. And I think that psychologically we need to feel as though we can be making progress for as long as we can in some realm. And that, I think, for your older trainers is really key. Find new ways, be the new dog, learn the new tricks, and keep at it. But keep at it. That's most key.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just turned 38. So I'm not, I'm trying to catch up. But I'm trying new things. I recently got kettlebell certified, Russian kettlebell certified last year with Coach Westy, and boy, oh boy, was that something, what a challenge physically. And it just, I got comfortable at being uncomfortable, and doing things that I just wasn't that good at. As physical as my job always was over the years, you just get comfortable with doing certain things, and you do the things you're good at. And that's what I like. What you were just saying is, you have to find new ways to challenge yourself and find new things to set as goals and as benchmarks, and there are different ways to determine strength, and it's just so cool. You know, I got a guy like yourself that's, you know, coming up on 52, still in great physical condition and extremely strong and mentally very tough, and it's just, I think it's a great inspiration to our audience, who's obviously largely male and largely in that 30 to 60 range. You know, so I think it's just kind of a really positive message that, you know, you can continue to really push the limits, and you just have to realize what those limits are, and they do change as you get older. Well, Mike, I think, Chris. Yeah. Well, you know, I'm trying to be as as gifted with words as you. It's a bit tough, but you have a great way of putting things and making it very, you know, easy to digest. I think you make everything sound so almost simple in a way, which is, but it's just really your determination and your consistency and that no quit kind of mentality. So thank you so much for your time. I'm sure everyone listening really got a lot out of this, and you know, we just wish you nothing but the best and more years of entertainment and terrific new feats of strength, which I'm sure will be just around the corner. So God bless you, and thank you so much, and we will certainly be chatting again in the future.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the chance to talk with you, Chris, and to share some encouragement with all of your active viewership there. That's just awesome, and I hope all of them, you know, continue to find ways to challenge themselves and just to get clear on what they want and go after it.
That's it, baby. Cool. Very awesome. Appreciate it, Mike. You have a phenomenal day. And same to our listeners. Thank you so much, and may God bless us all.
Great. Take care, Chris.